Part 2 of Chapter 20 of Book 8 of Les Misérables, Volume 3 by Victor Hugo. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Les Misérables, Volume 3 by Victor Hugo. Translated by Isabel Florence HAPGOOD. Book 8, The Wicked Poor Man. Chapter 20, The Trap, Part 2. As he had ceased to intercept Marius's visual array, Marius could examine this thing, and in the daub he actually did recognize a battle, a background of smoke, and a man carrying another man. It was the group composed of Pontmercy and Thénardier. The sergeant, the rescuer, the colonel rescued. Marius was like a drunken man. This picture restored his father to life in some sort. It was no longer the signboard of the wine shop at Montfermeil. It was a resurrection. A tomb had yawned. A phantom had risen there. Marius heard his heart beating in his temples. He had the cannon of Waterloo in his ears. His bleeding father, vaguely depicted on that sinister panel, terrified him, and it seemed to him that the misshapen spectre was gazing intently at him. When Thénardier had recovered his breath, he turned his bloodshot eyes on Monsieur Leblanc, and said to him in a low, curt voice, "What have you to say before we put the handcuffs on you?" Monsieur Leblanc held his peace. In the midst of this silence, a cracked voice launched this lugubrious sarcasm from the corridor. "If there's any wood to be split, I'm there." It was the man with the axe, who was growing merry. At the same moment, an enormous, bristling and clayey face made its appearance at the door, with a hideous laugh which exhibited not teeth, but fangs. It was the face of the man with the butcher's axe. "Why have you taken off your mask?" cried Thénardier in a rage. "For fun," retorted the man. For the last few minutes, Monsieur Leblanc had appeared to be watching and following all the movements of Thénardier, who, blinded and dazzled by his own rage, was stalking to and fro in the den with full confidence that the door was guarded, and of holding an unarmed man fast, he being armed himself, of being 9 against 1, supposing that the female Thénardier counted for but one man. During his address to the man with the pole-axe, he had turned his back to Monsieur Leblanc. Monsieur Leblanc seized this moment, overturned the chair with his foot and the table with his fist, and with one bound, with prodigious agility, before Thénardier had time to turn around, he had reached the window. To open it, to scale the frame, to bestride it, was the work of a second only. He was half out when 6 robust fists seized him and dragged him back energetically into the hovel. These were the 3 chimney-builders who had flung themselves upon him. At the same time, the Thénardier woman had wound her hands in his hair. At the trampling which ensued, the other ruffians rushed up from the corridor. The old man on the bed, who seemed under the influence of wine, descended from the pallet and came reeling up, with a stone-breaker's hammer in his hand. One of the chimney-builders, whose smirched face was lighted up by the candle, and in whom Marius recognized, in spite of his daubing, Panchaud, alias Printanier, alias Bigrenaille, lifted above Monsieur Leblanc's head a sort of bludgeon made of 2 balls of lead at the 2 ends of a bar of iron. Marius could not resist this sight. "My father!" he thought. "Forgive me!" And his fingers sought the trigger of his pistol. The shot was on the point of being discharged when Thénardier's voice shouted, "Don't harm him!" This desperate attempt of the victim, far from exasperating Thénardier, had calmed him. There existed in him 2 men, the ferocious man and the adroit man. Up to that moment, in the excess of his triumph in the presence of the prey which had been brought down and which did not stir, the ferocious man had prevailed. When the victim struggled and tried to resist, the adroit man reappeared and took the upper hand. "Don't hurt him," he repeated, and without suspecting it, his first success was to arrest the pistol in the act of being discharged, and to paralyze Marius, in whose opinion the urgency of the case disappeared, and who, in the face of this new phase, saw no inconvenience in waiting a while longer. Who knows whether some chance would not arise which would deliver him from the horrible alternative of allowing Ursule's father to perish, or of destroying the colonel's savior? A Herculean struggle had begun. With one blow full in the chest, M. Leblanc had sent the old man tumbling, rolling in the middle of the room, then with 2 backward sweeps of his hand he had overthrown 2 more assailants, and he held one under each of his knees. The wretches were rattling in the throat beneath this pressure as under a granite millstone. But the other 4 had seized the formidable old man by both arms and the back of his neck, and were holding him doubled up over the 2 chimney-builders on the floor. Thus, the master of some and mastered by the rest, crushing those beneath him and stifling under those on top of him, endeavoring in vain to shake off all the efforts which were heaped upon him, M. Leblanc disappeared under the horrible group of ruffians like the wild boar beneath a howling pile of dogs and hounds. They succeeded in overthrowing him upon the bed nearest the window, and there they held him in awe. The Thénardier woman had not released her clutch on his hair. "Don't you mix yourself up in this affair," said Thénardier. "You'll tear your shawl." The Thénardier obeyed as the female wolf obeys the male wolf, with a growl. "Now," said Thénardier, "search him, you other fellows." M. Leblanc seemed to have renounced the idea of resistance. They searched him. He had nothing on his person except a leather purse containing 6 francs and his handkerchief. Thénardier put the handkerchief into his own pocket. "What? No pocket-book?" he demanded. "No, nor watch," replied one of the chimney-builders. "Never mind," murmured the masked man who carried the big key in the voice of a ventriloquist. "He's a tough old fellow." Thénardier went to the corner near the door, picked up a bundle of ropes, and threw them at the men. "Tie him to the leg of the bed," said he. And, catching sight of the old man who had been stretched across the room by the blow from M. Leblanc's fist, and who made no movement, he added, "Is Boulatruelle dead?" "No," replied Bigrenaille, "he's drunk." "Sweep him into a corner," said Thénardier. 2 of the chimney-builders pushed the drunken man into the corner near the heap of old iron with their feet. "Babette," said Thénardier in a low tone to the man with the cudgel, "why did you bring so many? They were not needed." "What can you do?" replied the man with the cudgel. "They all wanted to be in it. This is a bad season. There's no business going on." The pallet on which M. Leblanc had been thrown was a sort of hospital bed, elevated on 4 coarse wooden legs, roughly hewn. M. Leblanc let them take their own course. The ruffians bound him securely in an upright attitude, with his feet on the ground at the head of the bed, the end which was most remote from the window and nearest to the fireplace. When the last knot had been tied, Thénardier took a chair and seated himself almost facing M. Leblanc. Thénardier no longer looked like himself. In the course of a few moments his face had passed from unbridled violence to tranquil and cunning sweetness. Marius found it difficult to recognize in that polished smile of a man in official life the almost bestial mouth which had been foaming but a moment before. He gazed with amazement on that fantastic and alarming metamorphosis, and he felt as a man might feel who should behold a tiger converted into a lawyer. "Monsieur," said Thénardier. And dismissing with a gesture the ruffians who still kept their hands on M. Leblanc, "Stand off a little, and let me have a talk with the gentleman." All retired towards the door. He went on, "Monsieur, you did wrong to try to jump out of the window. You might have broken your leg. Now, if you will permit me, we will converse quietly. In the first place, I must communicate to you an observation which I have made, which is, that you have not uttered the faintest cry." Thénardier was right. This detail was correct, although it had escaped Marius in his agitation. M. Leblanc had barely pronounced a few words without raising his voice, and even during his struggle with the 6 ruffians near the window, he had preserved the most profound and singular silence. Thénardier continued, "Mon Dieu! You might have shouted 'Stop thief' a bit, and I should not have thought it improper. Murder! That, too, is said occasionally, and, so far as I am concerned, I should not have taken it in bad part. It is very natural that you should make a little row when you find yourself with persons who don't inspire you with sufficient confidence. You might have done that, and no one would have troubled you on that account. You would not even have been gagged. And I will tell you why. This room is very private. That's its only recommendation, but it has that in its favor. You might fire off a mortar, and it would produce about as much noise at the nearest police station as the snores of a drunken man. Here a cannon would make a boom, and the thunder would make a poof. It's a handy lodging. But, in short, you did not shout, and it is better so. I present you my compliments, and I will tell you the conclusion that I draw from that fact. My dear sir, when a man shouts, who comes? The police. And after the police? Justice. Well, you've not made an outcry. That is because you don't care to have the police and the courts come in any more than we do. It is because, I have long suspected it, you have some interest in hiding something. On our side we have the same interest, so we can come to an understanding. As he spoke thus, it seemed as though Thénardier, who kept his eyes fixed on M. Leblanc, were trying to plunge the sharp points which darted from the pupils into the very conscience of his prisoner. Moreover, his language, which was stamped with a sort of moderated, subdued insolence and crafty insolence, was reserved and almost choice, and in that rascal, who had been nothing but a robber a short time previously, one now felt the man who had studied for the priesthood. The silence preserved by the prisoner, that precaution which had been carried to the point of forgetting all anxiety for his own life, that resistance opposed to the first impulse of nature, which is to utter a cry, all this, it must be confessed, now that his attention had been called to it, troubled Marius, and affected him with painful astonishment. Thénardier's well-grounded observation still further obscured for Marius the dense mystery which enveloped that grave and singular person on whom Courfeyrac had bestowed the sobriquet of Monsieur Leblanc. But whoever he was, bound with ropes, surrounded with executioners, half plunged, so to speak, in a grave which was closing in upon him to the extent of a degree with every moment that passed, in the presence of Thénardier's wrath, as in the presence of his sweetness, this man remained impassive, and Marius could not refrain from admiring at such a moment the superbly melancholy visage. Here, evidently, was a soul which was inaccessible to terror, and which did not know the meaning of despair. Here was one of those men who command amazement in desperate circumstances. Extreme as was the crisis, inevitable as was the catastrophe, there was nothing here of the agony of the drowning man who opens his horror-filled eyes under the water. Thénardier rose in an unpretending manner, went to the fireplace, shoved aside the screen, which he leaned against the neighboring pallet, and thus unmasked the brazier full of glowing coals, in which the prisoner could clearly see the chisel, white-hot and spotted here and there, with tiny scarlet stars. Then Thénardier returned to his seat beside M. Leblanc. "I continue," said he. "We can come to an understanding. Let us arrange this matter in an amicable way. I was wrong to lose my temper just now. I don't know what I was thinking of. I went a great deal too far. I said extravagant things. For example, because you are a millionaire, I told you that I exacted money, a lot of money, a deal of money. That would not be reasonable. Mon Dieu, in spite of your riches, you have expenses of your own. Who has not? I don't want to ruin you. I am not a greedy fellow, after all. I am not one of those people who, because they have the advantage of the position, profit by the fact to make themselves ridiculous. Why, I'm taking things into consideration and making a sacrifice on my side. I only want 200,000 francs. Monsieur Leblanc uttered not a word. Thénardier went on. You see that I put not a little water in my wine. I'm very moderate. I don't know the state of your fortune, but I do know that you don't stick at money, and a benevolent man like yourself can certainly give 200,000 francs to the father of a family who is out of luck. Certainly you are reasonable, too. You haven't imagined that I should take all the trouble I have today and organize this affair this evening, which has been labor well bestowed, in the opinion of these gentlemen, merely to wind up by asking you for enough to go and drink red wine at 15 sous and eat veal at Desnoyers. 200,000 francs, it's surely worth all that. This trifle once out of your pocket, I guarantee you that that's the end of the matter, and that you have no further demands to fear. You will say to me, but I haven't 200,000 francs about me. Oh, I'm not extortionate. I don't demand that. I only ask one thing of you. Have the goodness to write what I am about to dictate to you." Here Thénardier paused. Then he added, emphasizing his words and casting a smile in the direction of the brazier, "I warn you that I shall not admit that you don't know how to write." A grand inquisitor might have envied that smile. Thénardier pushed the table close to M. Leblanc, and took an inkstand, a pen, and a sheet of paper from the drawer which he left half open, and in which gleamed the long blade of the knife. He placed the sheet of paper before M. Leblanc. "Write," said he. The prisoner spoke at last. "How do you expect me to write? I am bound." "That's true. Excuse me," ejaculated Thénardier. "You are quite right." And turning to Bigrenaille, "Untie the gentleman's right arm." Panchaud, alias Printanier, alias Bigrenaille, executed Thénardier's order. When the prisoner's right arm was free, Thénardier dipped the pen in the ink and presented it to him. "Understand thoroughly, sir, that you are in our power, at our discretion, that no human power can get you out of this, and that we shall be really grieved if we are forced to proceed to disagreeable extremities. I know neither your name nor your address, but I warn you that you will remain bound until the person charged with carrying the letter which you are about to write shall have returned. Now be so good as to write." "What?" demanded the prisoner. "I will dictate." M. Leblanc took the pen. Thénardier began to dictate. "My daughter—" The prisoner shuddered, and raised his eyes to Thénardier. "Put down 'my daughter,'" said Thénardier. M. Leblanc obeyed. Thénardier continued. "Come instantly." He paused. "You address her as thou, do you not?" "Who?" asked M. Leblanc. "Parbleu!" cried Thénardier. "The little one, the lark." M. Leblanc replied without the slightest apparent emotion. "I do not know what you mean." "Go on, nevertheless," ejaculated Thénardier, and he continued to dictate. "Come immediately. I am in absolute need of thee. The person who will deliver this note to thee is instructed to conduct thee to me. I am writing for thee. Come with confidence." M. Leblanc had written the whole of this. Thénardier resumed. "Ah! Erase 'come with confidence.' That might lead her to suppose that everything was not as it should be, and that distrust is possible." M. Leblanc erased the 3 words. "Now," pursued Thénardier, "sign it. What's your name?" The prisoner laid down the pen and demanded, "For whom is this letter?" "You know well," retorted Thénardier. "For the little one. I just told you so." It was evident that Thénardier avoided naming the young girl in question. He said the lark, he said the little one, but he did not pronounce her name, the precaution of a clever man guarding his secret from his accomplices. To mention the name was to deliver the whole affair into their hands, and to tell them more about it than there was any need of their knowing. He went on. "Sign. What is your name?" "Urbain Fabre," said the prisoner. Thénardier, with the movement of a cat, dashed his hand into his pocket and drew out the handkerchief which had been seized on M. Leblanc. He looked for the mark on it, and held it close to the candle. "U.F. That's it. Urbain Fabre. Well, sign it U.F." The prisoner signed. "As 2 hands are required to fold the letter, give it to me. I will fold it." That done, Thénardier resumed. "Address it Mademoiselle Fabre, at your house. I know that you live a long distance from here, near Saint-Jacques-du-Haut-Pas, because you go to mass there every day, but I don't know in what street. I see that you understand your situation. As you've not lied about your name, you will not lie about your address. Write it yourself." The prisoner paused thoughtfully for a moment, then he took the pen and wrote, "Mademoiselle Fabre, at Monsieur Urbain Fabre, Rue Saint-Dominique d'Enfer, No. 17. Thénardier seized the letter with a sort of feverish convulsion. "Wife!" he cried. The Thénardier woman hastened to him. "Here's the letter. You know what you have to do. There is a carriage at the door. Set out at once, and return ditto." And addressing the man with the meat-axe, "Since you have taken off your nose-screen, accompany the mistress. You will get up behind the fiacre. You know where you left the team?" "Yes," said the man. and depositing his axe in a corner, he followed Madame Thénardier. As they set off, Thénardier thrust his head through the half-open door and shouted into the corridor, "Above all things, don't lose the letter. Remember that you carry 200,000 francs with you." The Thénardier's harsh voice replied, "Be easy, I have it in my bosom." A minute had not elapsed when the sound of the cracking of a whip was heard, which rapidly retreated and died away. "Good," growled Thénardier, "they're going at a fine pace. At such a gallop, the bourgeoise will be back inside 3/4 of an hour." He drew a chair close to the fireplace, folding his arms and presenting his muddy boots to the brazier. "My feet are cold," said he. Only 5 ruffians now remained in the den with Thénardier and the prisoner. These men, through the black masks or paste which covered their faces, and made of them, at fear's pleasure, charcoal burners, negroes, or demons, had a stupid and gloomy air, and it could be felt that they perpetrated a crime like a bit of work tranquilly, without either wrath or mercy, with a sort of ennui. They were crowded together in one corner like brutes, and remained silent. Thénardier warmed his feet. The prisoner had relapsed into his taciturnity. A sombre calm had succeeded to the wild uproar which had filled the garret but a few moments before. The candle, on which a large stranger had formed, cast but a dim light in the immense hovel. The brazier had grown dull, and all those monstrous heads cast misshapen shadows on the walls and ceiling. No sound was audible except the quiet breathing of the old drunken man, who was fast asleep. End of Book 8, Chapter 20, Part 2.